So folks, we're back with another Marvel Snap card review. We got the official reveal for the May 2023 season of cards, and some of these have actually changed a fair bit since the data mined versions. So you may not have seen the final forms of these. I always like to wait for my card reviews until we do get those final versions. And on top of that, we've got some crazy powerful cards in this. I think a couple of these are actually going to be just meta changing, super staple sorts of cards we see everywhere. So when I rate these from 1 to 4 stars at the end of the video, spoiler alert, there are going to be some 4-star cards. Now that said, we're going to kick it off here with the new season pass card for the month. It is Nebula, and Nebula is a 1 cost 1 power, and that has been confirmed. There's some other 4/6 versions of this floating around, but she is indeed a 1/1. And she reads, each turn your opponent doesn't play a card here plus 2 power except the turn you play this. And so no freebies the turn you play or if you call your shot, unlike the other Guardians. But man, I think this card has so much potential. I think very often this will just organically turn into a 1/5, maybe even a 1/7. Any kind of support or shenanigans or synergies aside, in a normal game state of Marvel Snap, if you play this on turn 1, it's not going to be possible for the opponent to keep playing cards to the Nebula location. They're going to have to give her some buffs. The way decks are structured, they just don't have the flexibility to keep weaving cards into a location turn after turn. They have things they want to play on curve, and they have to commit them power to other spots. Play a big 4 cost, play a big Devil Dino somewhere, right? And in those instances, Nebula is going to continue to keep growing. Other decks might, like, a Zoo deck that's playing a 1 cost every turn or something might have some options here for Nebula, but a vast majority of the time, a 1/5 or a 1/7 is my expectation under normal circumstances. Now, beyond that, of course, you have special circumstances. If you tuck this behind a storm, play this, storm the location later. The final 3 turns of the game on turn, or probably the final 2 turns of the game, turn 5 and turn 6, the opponent's not playing this. That's a free +4 on Nebula, right? So she'd be great to shore up those sorts of locations. Other just locations themselves, like miniaturized lab that are closing off. Hey, get a Nebula down there early, and suddenly she's going to be enormous all on her own. So both, I think, a natural utility that a lot of decks are going to favor, just the scaling 1-drop a la something like Sunspot, but one that does not take additional commitments. You don't have to put more energy into this, but then also decks that are able to manipulate this in some way to benefit via Storm, Professor X, whatever it might be that shuts stuff down. Suddenly Nebula can continue to scale off those synergies as well. Now, on top of that, I think there's this really cool strategic back and forth element for Nebula where you're just creating so much friction and really making your opponent have to work through this. That can give you a little bit of an informational or strategic advantage. I'm imagining scenarios where you're going into turn 6, you're down by a power, say in the left location, and Nebula's gonna win if your opponent doesn't play there. So she's forcing their hand to play into these spots lest they lose, lest they get outscaled, which might give you information to play elsewhere or stack on top of that, whatever it might be. But she's creating these moments and these opportunities for you to learn a little bit about what your opponent's deciding to do, where they're putting their power, and so on. So I think great scaling, high general use case, some great specific synergies and use cases as well. And I think an interesting little skill testing card of sorts, or at least, making your opponent have to think a little bit more. All of those add up here to a card I think we're going to see a lot. I suspect this will become a sort of staple 1-cost card in many ways, like things we've seen for Sunspot before. Yes, of course, Killmonger exists. Yes, this dies to Killmonger. That's not a great reason for a card not to feel powerful, though, as we've seen with Sunspot. Can be very good even though Killmonger exists. So for me, I do think we're going to see a lot of Nebula. I think this one looks really strong. So next up here, this card is busted. I think this card is absolutely insanely strong. This is Iron Lad, a new 4/6 with on reveal, copy the text of your deck's top card. So this is allowing you to get extra copies of card texts that you love. You're stuffing your deck with cards you like for your deck that synergize with your gameplay and that do things that are great for you. And this is giving you extra ways to get those awesome sorts of effects. And it goes beyond that because it's taking those effects and putting them into a really efficient 6 power for a 4-cost card. So a lot of things we have in Marvel Snap, the effects are so powerful, they're so useful, they're so synergistic that they have to be hedged with a low power. Think about Iron Man, right? His effect is so big that he has to be a 0 power card. Well, Iron Lad can become an Iron Man. It can get that huge upside on the card text, and it can bundle the 6 power in with it, which of course is insane. That makes Iron Lad a 412 himself that also still scales up your location like Iron Man. And what that means is you can take these really high powered card texts of your 5 or 6 cost cards and get extra versions of them that you know are going to have some stat efficiency baked in. So you're not making the sacrifice of tempo or stats for playing these really useful high powered effects. You're just getting a great body on top of this great effect. So it's giving you like extra versions of awesome effects. You know your deck is running good cards. You know you're getting some awesome power for it. All of that to me makes this card so good for any deck that's running big cards with great card text. Now, I mean, obviously, if your deck is running a bunch of 1-cost cards with card texts that aren't probably all that useful, maybe you're not as excited about Iron Lad. But, you know, the fact that his stats are good at a baseline, you're probably not like too distraught either. You know, if this rolls into an Iceman, for instance, I don't think that's a bad play. Iceman doesn't have the most powerful on reveal, but it's really good. It's great for a 1-cost card. It's not bad for a 4-cost card. So I don't think the threshold for building a deck that supports Iron Lad, in other words, is going to be particularly difficult. If it whiffs here and there a little bit, probably not a huge loss, because the moments it hits are going to be enormous. They're going to be so swingy and so powerful that it's going to be a win condition, I think, in its own right in many cases. There's also some reconnaissance value here a little bit, determining what your deck's top card is going to be. If you're not running Howard the Duck, a card we're going to talk about here shortly, and you don't know what your next card's going to be, that could be useful to see what your top deck's going to be. Your opponent will also know, of course, but I think you can often use that information a little more advantageously than the opponent can. And then, of course, with Howard the Duck, you're also going to maybe wait to be able to play Iron Lad until you're sure you're going to have a great top deck. May not always work out because the window is pretty small late in the game there to line it up, but maybe hold it for a turn or two just to make sure you hit the right thing. Could be cool. This could be a bonus Galactus, a bonus Null, a bonus Iron Man, a bonus Patriot. You know, the list just continues to go on and on and on. It actually kind of gives you an extra draw as well for some of your big stuff. Like, oh man, I didn't hit my big awesome Odin. He's one of the last 2 cards in the deck. Well, Iron Lad might give you another shot to hit that really powerful thing that you're trying to find. So all in all, I just love this card. I think it's going to be really good. I can see so many different deck lists where this slots in perfectly, because it's like, oh yeah, that effect's great for Iron Lad. Great for Iron Lad. I mean, you know, I don't know. Here I just pulled up Untapped. Here's an on reveal deck. Doctor Doom, amazing. Odin, amazing. Gamora, amazing. White Tiger, amazing. Wong, yeah, why not? Right? Like that sounds pretty cool. Ironheart, sure, it's a 412 effectively. Then yeah, why not? Right? I went over to like a Darkhawk Dino deck. It's like, oh my god, Darkhawk, insane. Starting your Darkhawk at 6 base power is nuts. Devil Dinosaur, you know, it's a nice little buff. 4 cost. Devil Dinosaur that's got 3 extra power. Sure, I'll take it. Imagine a Mystique. That's insane. 4/6 Mystique. So, you know, you just look across decks and there are so many great fits for this. I think this card's going to be absolutely bonkers. I'm excited to give it a shot too. I think this looks really fun and really powerful. All right, so next up here, we've got Howard the Duck, a new 1/2 with ongoing. Tap this to see the top card of your deck. And yeah, of course, we love to know the top card of our deck because that gives us information, can help us plan our plays and turns a little bit better. Oh, I can hold this resource because I got this next turn. I don't need to use this now to fill my curve. I got something coming. Oh, I'm hitting my win condition. I'm going to snap. There's all kinds of little reasons. Of course, it's great to know what you're about to draw. And the fact that you get to see it every single turn, because you can just keep tapping this turn after turn, that's definitely going to stack up to a lot of added informational advantage. Now, I do have some questions about how actionable or useful that information is going to be, because ultimately you're not changing your fate too often. You know, the card you're going to draw is the card you're going to draw. You're going to find that out soon. So how much does that foresight change your current plays? Are you still kind of stuck taking the line that you had to take. It's like, oh, I can't do much. I have a 2-drop. I'm going to play my 2-drop. The fact that I'm top decking this other thing next turn maybe doesn't change too much of your current position or alter your decision making all that often. So a little bit iffy. I think more advantageous from a snapping standpoint. Like, oh, I know I'm hitting my weak addition. Snapping now is going to be better for me. That's an extra layer that I think skilled players will probably be able to utilize rather nicely with this card. Obviously, there's some synergies for things like Iron Lad and Jubilee as well. I'm not convinced that's going to feel that powerful either. You're not going to like be holding your Iron Lad, I think, too often for the next best card, because you don't know what the next card's going to be either, right? So could get worse, could get better. I don't know. I've seen a lot of positivity around this card. I guess I'm a little more neutral. I certainly don't think it's bad. I think it's useful. That's great information to have. I just am curious about how actionable that is, how much that's actually going to change your fate all that often, because sometimes the cards you get, you just got to play them the way when you get them and the way you get them, right? It doesn't really change too much about your decision making. So, this is a weird comparison, but it's like, is this a little bit in that Uatu vein where the reconnaissance value doesn't make up for just having higher stats and higher outputs, a cards that do things more directly? Because this is competing against other cards that can get bigger, that can do things like Iceman that's got disruption value. Would you rather your card do something directly as opposed to kind of guide you or direct you? I'm worried a lot of decks are just going to be looking for that output value as opposed to the recon value. And as such, Howard the deck will probably fall out of fashion. I definitely think this is a card that wouldn't be worth like 6k tokens. Maybe this starts popping into decks a little bit more here and there as he becomes available. There's also that ongoing synergy, maybe some Spectrum stuff to consider. But ultimately, I think a fine card, just one I'm not quite as high on as I've seen a lot of people. I don't think this becomes an every deck 1-drop sort of card. I think power and effects matter too much that are like direct and impactful, whereas this is kind of indirect and secondary in its effect. All right, so next up here we have the High Evolutionary, and this is probably the craziest card design we've ever seen in Marvel Snap, and one of the coolest and craziest card designs I've seen in any card game. Frankly, this is very, very cool. He is a 4/7, and he reads, at the start of the game, unlock the potential of your cards with no abilities. And what does that mean? Well, Marvel Snap has 7 cards currently with no abilities, collectible cards, that is, anyway. So at the start of the game, basically, he's going to give each of these cards an actual effect. He's going to give them some useful card text. So let's start off with Wasp. She's going to get, on reveal, afflict 2 random enemy cards here with -1 power. So if there are 2 cards, she basically becomes kind of a 0/3 as a net power output. Misty Knight will read, when you end a turn with unspent energy, give another friendly card +1 power. Now, do note that does not read like for each unspent energy. So this is not like Sunspot where if you like float 4 energy, she's going to give +4 power. This is a binary result, so she either will or she won't. If you float 1 energy, she'll do the same thing as if you float 4 energy. At least, I mean, I haven't seen it obviously, but at least if the card text is true to the difference between her and Sunspot, that's how she'll work. Shocker is, on reveal, the leftmost card in your hand costs 1 less. So this gives you a discount, maybe cheat something out a little early, effectively making him kind of net 1 cost. Cyclops, when you end a turn with unspent energy, again, that's that same binary condition, afflict 2 random enemies here with -1 power. So kind of like Wasp's effect, but it's repeatable. If you float energy multiple turns in a row, that could stack up. So, he could do -2, -4, -6 throughout the course of a given game, making him, effectively maybe sometimes like a 6/10 because you're floating energy. It's hard to do the math a little bit, but you get the idea. The Thing is, on reveal, afflict a random enemy card here with -1 power and repeat this twice more. So this is more similar to Wasp. It doesn't continue to scale like Cyclops, but notably, this can hit the same card 3 times because you get 3 total negative hits there. Unlike Wasp, which has 2 random enemy cards, she needs 2 cards to work. to full effect, but since his is repeating it and it's affecting a random enemy card, if there's one thing in that location, it can hit it 3 times as I read it. So again, that effectively makes him kind of a 4/9 in net power. Abomination's pretty cool. Costs 1 less for each enemy card in play that's afflicted with negative power. So you've got Thing, Cyclops, Wasp afflicting with negative power, which means Abomination, of course, could basically go down to a 0/9 or something, which is clearly awesome. That's really insane. Big time stacking discount. So there's kind of 2 different lines basically in these. There's the negative power and the unspent energy, and then there's 2 payoffs. Abomination is the affliction, and then Hulk is the unspent energy payoff. He reads ongoing +2 power for each turn you ended with unspent energy. So if you're playing that on 6, you've got turn 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 potentially. I don't know why I had to count. That's literally just 5. Whatever, you get it. So that's like +10 power possible for the Hulk, assuming, well, I guess actually if you had extra energy on turn 6, he could actually get it there as well because it is ongoing. So he would update, I guess, to potentially even have +12, but roughly, 20, 22, 24 power sort of output there for the Hulk, which clearly makes him a really big threat for 6 energy. So in a like vacuum for each of these cards, these are obviously nice upgrades. Clearly some of them look a little bit better to me than others. I'm not sure I'm like in love with Shocker necessarily, but like Abomination seems like a crazy good discount. Like having a 0/9 to drop is going to be just absolutely brutal. So the question really becomes with something like High Evolutionary, right? It's are all of these played in a single deck? Do you build like a High Evolutionary deck and run all of this? I mean, clearly there are some connections. Basically, Cyclops fuses the 2 worlds together because he cares about both unspent energy and afflictions. If you do that right, you've got 8 of your 12 cards accounted for because there are 7 here and you have to run High Evolutionary. So you've got 4 complementary cards. You could do stuff like Sunspot or She-Hulk, maybe a Scorpion because he's also a negative power affliction. So there are outside cards that can still feed into these synergies and support things like Abomination. I think that's a possibility, but what I think we'll really see happen instead is people will pick the ones that have the most meaningful upside and build something that like plays specifically towards, for instance, like a big Abomination, or you play like a She-Hulk Infinite Hulk deck that's all about like unspent energy synergies, so you have some kind of different line there. I don't think we'll see too many all-in High Evolutionary decks. I mean, it might still be good, it might still be relevant, but I think it'll get strongest when people are able to weave together a mix of really powerful regular cards in combination with specific key effects in this pool that kind of enable and set up for the power plays in this one. Now, I do want to keep in mind, I've seen a lot of people talk about Patriot with this. Remember, these don't work with Patriot anymore. They're given effects, so Patriot won't buff these. You're not playing a Patriot High Evolutionary deck. That wouldn't make any sense in this case. Patriot would just backfire. He wouldn't help you at all. So you're gonna have to support these in other ways in particular. And I'm curious. Scorpion makes Abomination potentially like a 1/9 in its own right. Is there any world where you just run High Evolutionary, Abomination, and a Scorpion? And to be fair, the Scorpion cards have to be played because it does say in play, of course, right? So it's got, if it hits 3 or 4, they have to play those 3 or 4 cards. That wouldn't always happen, but it wouldn't take much to just make Abomination a really powerful play. And it's worth noting too that High Evolutionary as a 4/7 is not bad at a base level. I don't think you're going to feel too stressed if you have to play a 4/7. Clearly not as strong as a lot of other 4-cost cards we have, but still not, it's not like a 4/2 where you're just giving up an entire turn for these sorts of effects. So I do think some combination, some permutation of these different cards is going to come together and lead to something really powerful. I bet the all-in package is okay, and then there are a few other bundles of 3 or 4 of these sorts of cards that feel absolutely bonkers together, and people will find out some way for this to be really, really powerful. Because I think both the Hulk payoff in an unspent deck and the Abomination Payoff are both really, really good in these instances. So I'm expecting this card to be rather powerful, building at least one really top tier deck and probably a couple of other varieties in the mid tier as well. So our final card here is the Living Tribunal, a 6/4 with an ongoing split your total power evenly among all locations. And couple notes here. Number one, this is an ongoing card. It was not an ongoing card in the reveal video. It had slightly different text that was at the end of the game, but I've gotten confirmation from the development team he is going to be ongoing, I'm told. They also teased there might be some additional inaccuracies in some of the other text. So apparently these reveal videos aren't quite as as golden as we expect them to be in regards to the final versions of cards. So this is an ongoing. We've also got some rules here around how this will handle remainders for numbers that are not evenly divisible by 3. So for instance, if you have 60 power, of course, that divides evenly 20, 20, 20. But if you have 59 power, it doesn't. You'd have a remainder of 2 after dividing by 3. Remainders of 2 will round up. So 59 would actually still be 20, 20, 20. Whereas if you had 58 power and dividing it by 3, you would round down with a remainder of 1 to 19, 19, 19. So keep that in mind if you don't have good even numbers that are divisible by 3. Now, in regards to the card itself and how you might use this one, I think the ideal scenario, of course, is you want to use cards that are able to scale power in a perhaps unfair or atypical fashion in a singular location. So think about cards like Shuri, for instance, that make one thing really big, or Iron Man that can make one location really big, and maybe even like, an Iron Man Onslaught if you cheat those out somehow. And you build up one spot a ton, get it to a really high power value, and then you slam Living Tribunal to redistribute those stats into other locations so that you're not overcommitted in that one spot, but instead you're more fairly and equally contesting each of the 3 locations. So, I think you could build decks specifically that have that kind of specific scaling to try to utilize Living Tribunal. That said, I think that's going to be a challenge and a really risky sort of thing to do, because if you don't hit your Iron Man, it's like, oh man, suddenly Living Tribunal is kind of bad because I'm just not getting big enough in that one spot to redistribute those stats. Also just susceptible to removal, answers, enchantress, etc., that are really risky in that scenario, both on the Iron Man and on the Living Tribunal. So trying to build a deck list to specifically manipulate yourself into a Living Tribunal situation, I think is going to be really susceptible to answers, really inconsistent, and maybe not even all that good. Because if you get to like 60 power in your Iron Man spot, you're still only going 20, 20, 20. That's what they showed in like the reveal video, basically, is 20, 20, 20 roughly. That doesn't seem crazy to me. It's not hard for people to beat 20, 20, 20 in some decks. And that kind of brings me back to my real challenge here with Living Tribunal. And the reason I don't think this card is actually going to be very good at all, which I know goes a little bit against the grain. I've seen some pretty hyped takes for this card. I think distributing your stats evenly across 3 spots is actually sometimes a weakness, not a strength. I don't know if that's a good thing. Of course, realistically in Marvel Snap, you want to contribute and develop power in 2 locations specifically. You want to win 2 spots. That's what matters. Now, of course, it's never that simple. Obviously, in a game of Marvel Snap, you need to be contesting all 3 spots. You need to have a kind of back and forth, make your opponent think about it, force them to use resources. So you obviously end up dabbling in all 3 locations in a given game of Marvel Snap, and it's important that you do that. You can't go all in on only 2 spots, but you still have some control and some granularity there where you're still kind of biasing yourself towards 2 spots. You're making decisions that put you in a favorable position. You're shifting power into one location or another. Maybe your opponent's not playing anything in one location. You're keeping that one small. You don't have to put a bunch of power there. Maybe the location gets locked off. You've already won Flooded, for instance, and you don't want to shift any power to Flooded. I already won Flooded. Living Tribunal is going to send some of my power to Flooded. That's already settled. That's a problem. So basically, you steal a lot of your decision making and the nuance of where power matters most if you're just kind of blindly spreading it out across all 3 spots. That steals a lot of the strategy and influence you can have over the impact of your power and your individual plays. So I think in a kind of like general use case scenario where you're just dropping a Living Tribunal or normal deck, usually that's going to be a downside. So I think you have to have some kind of really specific builds utilized as well. I think that has major risks, major concerns. More generally speaking, I don't even think this is an upside. And then the real root of all that problem is this is a 6/4. It's a 4 power play on turn 6. That's supposed to be your biggest turn, your strongest turn, your most powerful turn. Other decks are dumping 15, 20, 30 power on turn 6. And you're dumping 4. You know, there's obviously ways to change that, play this early, blah, 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 et cetera, right? But ultimately, and all other things equal, you're having an incredibly inefficient power play for an effect that I'm not even sure is actually an upside a lot of the time. Sometimes I think it's going to be a downside, but the net sacrifice you're making for total power is so significant that your opponent is going to have an easier time achieving those breakpoints and thresholds that beat all of your evenly split power. You know, if you go 20-20-20, it's a lot easier for them to go 21-21 if they're playing really big stuff on turn 6 and getting those power plays. A Sarah deck is dumping 20-30 power on that final turn, and you just get absolutely blown out of the water. So for me, the numbers here just don't make sense. You're sacrificing too much to play Living Tribunal, and the occasional times that shifting power around is useful. A lot of the times it's going to lower you where you need to be strong and make you strong where you don't need to be any stronger. You know, I want 30 and 30. I don't want 20-20-20. Sometimes I want 40 and 20. You know, it's really important to have some control over where exactly the power goes, because that's just how Marvel Snap works. So I think, you know, outside of some incredibly specific deck builds and scenarios, this card's going to feel incredibly awkward, feel very low powered, feel like when you play it, it just loses you the game. And those deck builds and scenarios where it does work are going to be really risky and really limited and probably not be high tier decks. So unfortunately, for a card I think is really cool looking, has a really flavorful effect, an awesome character, like gigantic, super crazy cosmic characters I love like this, I just don't think this one's going to get played a lot, which I know is not an opinion a lot of people have necessarily, or at least a lot of people have the opposite opinion, let's say. So I don't know. I'm curious. Can you guys talk me into liking Living Tribunal a little bit more from a power level standpoint? Because right now, from a power level standpoint, I think this card looks pretty weak. So all that said, let's do some quick reviews for these cards where I rate each of these from 1 to 4 stars. Nebula is a 3-star card. Iron Lad is a 4-star card. Howard the Duck is a 2-star card. High Evolutionary is a 4-star card. Living Tribunal is a 1-star card. And there you go, man. These are some pretty interesting cards. I think we got 3 really strong cards here that are going to shake up the meta in some significant ways for a couple of them. Not as sold as I've seen other people on these other ones, but even the cards I'm not as sold from a power level standpoint, like Howard the Duck or Living Tribunal. I mean, these are really cool effects, really interesting characters. So some flavor hits here, some stuff I'm really excited to try. I don't think it's going to be good, but I do think it's going to be a lot of fun. So either way, May season here looks pretty dang exciting for Marvel Snap. Curious to hear your thoughts on these cards down there in the comments below. Thanks so much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.